This podcast is intended for mature audiences, so grow up. I'm Leslie, and I'm a storyteller. But these aren't just any stories. These are my stories, untold until now. A Gen Xer who's lived through it all. The analog days, the digital dawn, and everything in between. From the suburban battlefields of being a childhood nobody to the existential angst of adulthood, I'm taking you on this journey through the events, the people, and the pop culture that defined my experience. This is Gen X Crossing. Episode 5. This is part 2 of my short series called The Hustle Chronicles, all about working in the 1980s. So, I told you a story about Casa Bonita in my last episode, my first job. But I never told you about my second, third, fourth, and fifth jobs. Don't worry. They all happened within like a year and a half. I know you're totally frothing at the mouth to hear all about it, so here we go. The relief I had from quitting my job at Casa Bonita was wonderful and very short-lived. Once my dad got wind of it, I made my case. Dad, it was really, really hard. That was it. That was the case. Parenthetically, also, it was the first time I understood that work is just work, and they care only about what you do for them while you are doing it. No matter how friendly a boss seemed, no matter how well we all got along and how much fun it was, how hard you worked, once you were gone, you were completely forgotten. I realize that seems terribly obvious to adult us, but sometimes we forget when various switches are flipped in our lives, realizations made as we moved into a more grown-up mindset. That first job taught me the nuance of feigning passion for the work, acting the part of one who represents the place that is cutting you a check every 2 weeks. That is really what we are paid for, to play along. The 80s, at least, seemed to be all about fitting in and taking care not to stand out too much in any way. The lines were drawn clearly. All of this makes sense to older me, but there are times I wish that didn't. Anyway, enough philosophy. End of parentheses. Once I made the case to my dad that the job was hard, his answer was succinct and to the point. I don't care. Go find another job, and this time closer to home. You should be able to walk there. Well, McDonald's was walking distance. I had walked there several times to spend my allowance. McDonald's for lunch, the Baskin-Robbins behind it for dessert. Daiquiri ice cream, always. Then I would go by Walgreens next to that to get bubblegum for the walk back home. I knew exactly how long it took to get there and back, and I had a friend or two who'd worked there, so why not? In the interview I had, the manager, a much older and more sophisticated 23-year-old woman. I want to say her name was Nina for some reason. Anyway, we'll call her Nina. She asked me about my experience at Casa Bonita. My application showed that I had worked there October to April, a whopping 7 months, as I had mentioned in my previous story. Wow, Casa Bonita's hard work, she said, impressed that I had chosen that as my first job. This job is much easier, and you get a regular hourly rate of $3.35 instead of $2.13 plus tips that you were getting at Casa. We don't do tips, so you can count on the $3.35. I said I could start right away since they were able to issue a uniform, and I already had my gum-sole granny shoes from Casa. Good to go. At the orientation 2 days later, I and 2 other new hires were issued our brown polyester pants, brown shirt with white pinstripes and a white collar, and of course, the McDonald's logo embroidered just above the left breast. Then there was the matching visor, solid brown with a yellow McDonald's insignia that matched the shirt, and this pinstriped piping. Now, I have to tell you, I looked online just to check my memory. I keep seeing white visors with pinstriping on the rim of the hat, but that would have been ridiculous back then. Can you imagine how dirty that would be? Ugh. Anyway, not at my McDonald's. and it fit tight. The pants were really snug and the legs were flared slightly. And then the shirt barely fit me and the polyester was so fucking scratchy. Anyway, we were at orientation. Nina took us through the usual, clocking in, clocking out, how much free food you could get per shift. If you worked 4 hours, you could choose 2 food items like fries and a small Coke. If you worked 6 or more, you could choose 2 items at one break and 2 items at another, or you could have one big meal. Eating off the line, as it was called, was cause for firing. The first few days, it was hard to resist all the smells, but it didn't take long before the smell, which I carried home in my hair and on my skin, made you want to retch. It was especially strong when I worked the 10-to-1. 10-to-1 was the hamburger grill. It was this giant, super hot metal monstrosity over which I would stoop for hours at a time during my shift. Hamburger patties were flash frozen and packed into groups of 10, which equaled 1 pound of beef. Looking like little meat pancakes but slapping the grill like pucks on ice, 10-to-1 cooked really quickly. There were no timers at the grill to tell you when to flip them. You had to watch and keep time yourself. Then you'd sprinkle some pre-minced onion, flip them, cook them another minute, and then lay them on the buns along with 2 pickles, 1 squirt of mustard, and 1 squirt of ketchup. And then the magic folding of the paper on which it lay. Tuck the paper under, put it in a little chute where it goes under the hot lamp, scrape the grill, and start over. We all took turns with fries and nuggets and pies whenever we could, but if you were assigned to 10-to-1 on your shift, you were it. There was another grill cook for quarter-pounders and special orders, but if it was a weeknight or close to closing time, you were the only one on deck on the 10-to-1. "Hey, Leslie," my manager would say to me through the opening between the heat lamps and the metal shelving. "We need 2 batches of 10-to-1. 1 batch for hamburgers, 1 for Big Macs, and we need a batch of 4-to-1, and we have an order of 2 filet-o-fish." I would start the filet-o-fish, which did have a timer. Then I would lay down the 10-to-1, come back, finish the filet-o-fish, then finish the 10-to-1, then start the 4-to-1, which were to become quarter-pounders. One of the best parts to working on the grill was not having to deal with customers. The worst by far were the people who came through the drive-thru. Drunks, ragers, entitled teens who didn't have to work. Every manner of asshole came through the drive-thru. I always found that cowardly. And also, what was so bad in your life that you had to snatch a bag of food out of the hands of a teenager who was just trying to make a buck? Anyway, after I had gotten at least somewhat trained on working and closing the grill, by the way, closing, very greasy cleanup, I was trained on more closing tasks. One night, I was being trained on cleaning the ice cream machine. My trainer, Calvin, was in the same high school as I was and a year ahead of me. Calvin was tall, blonde, sinewy. He started by opening the face of the machine, and inside was all the leftover soft serve which I was to dispose of. He told me to start scraping it out into the trash while he went to get some cleaning supplies. I squatted down, staring in the cylinder which was about half full, and had a thought. If the ice cream was just going to go in the trash, what would it hurt if I had some? I looked around me, and in an Augustus from Willy Wonka-esque moment, I reached in, scraped out a hand and forearm full, and started eating it off my hand, licking my fingers before it could drip on me. "What are you doing?" I was interrupted by an amused, astonished voice coming from over my shoulder. Calvin, of course. I stood, wiping my mouth on my arm and then shaking my hand to get the remainder into the trash. "It was just an instinct," I stammered. "You know, if you have a handful of something like ice cream or cookie dough, don't you want to just lick it off?" "No," he said, now full on laughing at me. "Come on, let's get you rinsed off and we'll finish cleaning and sanitizing." "I'm so sorry," I said, massively humiliated. "Don't worry," he said. "I don't think you'll do it again, right?" "Right. Are you going to tell our manager?" "No." The next week, Calvin asked me on a tennis date. The day that he was supposed to pick me up, I chickened out and hid upstairs while he rang our doorbell. Then I peeked out our window and watched him get in his car and leave. I just had too much leftover embarrassment from that moment. He refused to speak to me ever again. And I quit not long after that. Somehow I had managed to get away with not working for several months. Until May 1985. I had just turned 18 and graduated high school. And what was I doing while all the other kids were taking road trips and going swimming and staying out late? Yep, working. Mind you, I hadn't worked for like 7 months, so I kind of was a little behind anyway. When I went to that interview, my sister had gotten it for me through a friend. But anyway, the first thing the manager asked me was, "Why are you spending your last summer before college working? When I was your age, I was out with friends every night, going to movies and cruising on Colfax. Aren't you going to do anything?" Now, I was your basic loner anyway. I didn't really want to do anything except work, but I tried to make myself into kind of a martyr. "I have college coming up in the fall," I said. "I'm paying for it myself." "Oh, man," she said in sympathy, then added, "Well, try to have at least a little fun. It goes by really fast." I smiled back at her, but I had no plans except for work. The few friends I did have scattered to the north winds after we tossed our caps. They had plans to see relatives out of state, to go to parties, take vacations overseas with their parents. They were gone. It's an odd feeling what happens when that switch is flipped. The one where you realize that you're an adult now. In my world, at least in the 1980s, that was when you were 18. I wasn't completely without help or encouragement, but college was definitely all on me, and I knew it. I didn't even have a car, but I could still walk to a job, and Wilmore Garden Center was right across the street from McDonald's. I knew the basic math and that I wouldn't make enough money in one summer to make even a dent in my college expenses, but something was better than nothing. And there was an undercurrent of financial panic, which I could at least distract myself from by saying I was trying. Wilmore sounded perfect. $4 an hour, a full 65 cents more than I was making at Mickey D's. And all I had to do 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, was hand water the plants that the sprinkler system couldn't reach. That's right. 8 hours a day, I would stand in place at various locations on the outskirts of the nursery in the sun and hold an industrial hose over rows and rows of potted trees and shrubs. This was Colorado, high and dry. In fact, I don't think it rained even one day the whole time I worked at Wilmore. Needless to say, it didn't take long for me to get super bored. I asked if I could bring a Walkman and listen to cassettes, which was approved. But I soon discovered the batteries ran out fast, and I didn't want to waste all the money I was making buying more just so I could work. So I switched to reading books. One book in particular that was given to me by a couple at our church, a paperback called Ordering Your Private World by a guy named Gordon MacDonald. It was actually pretty practical if memory serves. It ended up getting a bit soggy one day when I accidentally dropped it, so I tried to just stare ahead, just focus on the watering, but then I would get sleepy standing on my feet. Also, my feet were getting wrecked. I didn't own water boots, like what teenager does in suburban Colorado, so my tennis shoes would be soaked before lunchtime. Still, I stuck it out until it was move-in day at my tiny college campus up the street. Good excuse to quit. The first week of school, when presented my bill for the semester, I freaked. Fortunately, the financial aid person, the lovely Joyce Hume at Colorado Christian College, yes, I still remember her very well, You never forget someone who connects you to money. Anyway, Joyce applied for a GSL on my behalf, which was a guaranteed student loan. I did have a teeny tiny little music scholarship, but that really just paid for my books. So the plan was for me to ride the GSL money and work less in the fall, then cut back on my school hours and work more in the spring with the remainder of the GSL money and then paying off the bill before the following fall each year. Lucky for me, there was a mall just down the street from the campus, Villa Italia Mall. And Foot Locker inside Villa Italia Mall was hiring for a cashier. I'm pretty sure they just had a help wanted sign in their display window, and it was the first thing I saw when I walked into the mall, so it worked out. Besides, I didn't want to work at Joslin's because you had to dress up to work at Joslin's. I didn't have any decent dress shoes. I wasn't cool enough to work at the Limited, and there was no way in hell I was going to work at the Orange Julius. The guy who interviewed me and would become my manager was Monty. Monty had a deceptively menacing look. Over 6 feet tall with thinning brown hair and a handlebar mustache beneath which was a perpetually bulging lower lip from the chewing tobacco he stored there all day, with the exception of lunchtime when he changed it out. He seemed completely unbothered by the deep staining the tobacco had left on his teeth, which ruined an otherwise really nice smile. It was a hair over a mile to the mall from my apartment on campus, so I could have walked it, but I had a really nice roomie, Lori, who took me there in the old family station wagon she had inherited from her parents. Believe me, she was very popular because she could fit a lot of people in that car. After my shift, she was always there, her car idling, waiting for me to come out the service door on the back side of the mall. She did that all the way until I got my own car, a fabulous gift paid for by my mother and my 2 sisters, a 1974 Super Beetle. I named him Petey. Petey got me safely there and back to many a snowy shift at the Foot Locker in the winter of 1985 and 86. Speaking of winter, you have not lived until you worked in retail between Christmas and New Year's. The day after Thanksgiving, shoppers in the greater Denver metro area, especially Lakewood, would descend on the Villa Italia Mall, taking every parking space around the circumference of the place. My roommate ended up taking me to work again during the Christmas season just so that I wouldn't have to leave early to fight for a place to put my car. From the minute Monty unlocked that metal gate and pulled it all the way up to the final closing announcement for the mall at 8:55, we were slammed. Theft and some credit card fraud were at an all-time high during this period, so I was charged with keeping an eye on the wall directly to my right by the cash register when I was ringing folks up to ensure that no one would snatch up a Denver Broncos hoodie and dart out the door while the guys had their backs turned. Monty did his own loss prevention by walking around the store while the 3 other salesmen retrieved shoes from the back, running boxes of Nikes and Reeboks and Avias back to the storeroom so they wouldn't be easy to walk out of the store with. I also had to match signatures to credit cards and call Monty over if it didn't look like a match. This was a bit time-consuming and the line could get kind of long, but honestly, the whole process took about twice as long as it does these days, so what's an extra few seconds between strangers? By the way, do you want to hear what a credit card reader sounded like back then? There it is. You put the card on the bottom, the piece of carbon paper on the top that was just made to fit that machine, and then you'd grab the handle and run it through and it would make the impression of the credit card. They could pay with credit card, cash, or check. Debit cards hadn't quite made their way to the banks around the Villa Italia Mall back then. Oh, and when somebody wrote a check, they would have to give a license and a credit card to give proof of their ID so that they wouldn't try to pass a bad check. Of course, they could pass a bad check anyway. You wouldn't know until after it bounced. I'm not really sure what that was supposed to prove, but anyway, we did it because we were supposed to. The only thing worse than the pre-Christmas rush was the post-Christmas returns. From December 26th to about January 4th, it was a steady stream of refunds. Monty encouraged the guys to try their best not to let the customer walk out without some kind of exchange. All those returns affected his standing with the other Foot Lockers vying for top sales for the quarter, and ultimately the year, and each return also meant that the commission the guys earned will be shaved off their next paycheck. Yikes. It made me glad that I had a steady wage. I was back down to $3.35, but it definitely wasn't as boring as Wilmore or as smelly as McDonald's. Plus, it was warm in the winter and air-conditioned in the summer. Not a bad gig at all. One time, during a quiet stretch after New Year's, someone came in and bought a bunch of stuff with a credit card. About an hour later, the police came into our store with the merch and said that this dude had been on a buying spree around the mall with a stolen card. The only thing that stopped him was an alert employee at Lewis Fine Candies. He noticed him making multiple trips out of his car with bags of stuff. Speaking of Lewis Fine Candies, they had the best caramel corn. Oh God, that smell was unreal. It's funny though, because I always feel like the smell of caramel corn was way more exciting than the actual taste, but I digress. Anyway, the police came into the store with the perp. And of course, after they left, Monty asked me, "Lesser, did you check the signatures on the card against the carbon?" Lesser was his nickname for me. My face immediately flushed red. "I thought that was just for Christmas," I said. He smiled a disappointed but not angry smile, then said, "Nope, we're checking them every time. Keep the merch here on the counter next to you and check the card against the signature. If it doesn't match or you can't tell, come and get me. And I'll ask to see their license, okay? That way you don't have to be the bad guy." Dude had the patience of a saint. So I was issued 2 polyester blue and white striped referee-style shirts. It was an upgrade from the McDonald's brown, I guess. Anyway, I had this brilliant idea that I was going to iron it so I looked more tidy for work, but they were polyester. And I burned it. It looked like something out of the I Love Lucy show. I had burned a shape of an iron on the bottom of the shirt, and it was like wearing plastic tucked into my pants. It was really awful. I just came clean, and he was like, "Yeah, that's fine. I should charge you, but I'm not going to." Again, heck of a nice guy. Anyway, after he told me, "This is the way we do it, make sure you do it that way," I said, "I'll be sure to do it that way from now on." Overall, I was a very naive young lady, but working at the mall gave me a glimpse outside of my sheltered, conservative life. This was the first time I had ever encountered a thief, in person at least, as far as I knew. It was also the first time I ever saw a man wear a women's wig. On Friday nights, without fail, this guy would walk the mall in a sandy brown wig, styled in a bob. He wore men's clothes from the neck down, a plaid 1960-style Western shirt, Wrangler jeans, and cowboy boots. Honestly, it unnerved me. One evening, I said to Monty, why do that in front of other people? Why not do that at home? That's so creepy. Monty's take on it surprised me, especially given that he was what you would call back then a manly man. He was a former athlete from a small town in Nebraska, running a mostly men's athletic wear store. He's not hurting anyone. Maybe it makes him happy to walk around in a women's wig. To each his own. Good point. Eventually, the guy started wearing low-heeled sandals in addition to the wig. Then pantyhose and a skirt. He did get more graceful in the sandals, but his gait never changed. I admired him for not trying to act too girly. Whatever his goal of walking the mall dressed in women's wear, at least he was true to himself. Now I understand that clothes don't have a gender, but this was a time when the lines were drawn differently, and towing the line socially was more critical to avoid mistreatment, or to be targeted as a perv or some kind of criminal-level weirdo. I already knew that I wasn't conventionally girly at 18. I longed to be. That actually gave me more compassion for him once I got used to seeing him. I could relate to him in some way I couldn't quite put my finger on for many, many decades. Summer was again just around the corner, and I wrapped up my first full year of college. I saw an ad in the Denver Post classifieds for a sales job. Guaranteed to make $1,250 a month. That was about $3,700 by today's standards, not bad for a 19-year-old. I hoped it wasn't telemarketing. I just can't, I thought, not even for that much money. But I read on. Group interviews held weekly, come dressed professionally, hiring on the spot. And you'll hear more about that in our next episode in this series, The Hustle Chronicles. Thank you for listening. There are many, many more little stories to come. Some might make you laugh or crack you up a little. Some might make you sad. Some are just stories. All of them really happened. If you enjoy hearing these stories, I'd love it if you'd like and subscribe. Until next time, peace out.